Hello and welcome back everybody. Now this video really is more about the editing and the post-processing side of things and what I do with my images once I've got them back home and I've got them on the computer. But I started the video here because it might be a bit of a cliche to say in landscape photography, but the editing process really does start already during the preparation, during the scouting and during the actual image taking process. So I'm already thinking about the things that I'd want to bring out in the editing while I'm taking the photo and while I'm scouting. Now, of course, if you'd rather skip ahead to the tips, then you can follow the timestamps. I've added them to the bottom of the video, so feel free to skip through this section if you're just interested in the actual editing parts. But I do think there's some really valuable stuff which will be said here, and I will tie some of it back in while I'm editing and explain why it's so important. So hopefully you'll be able to see the link between editing and the image taking process and some of the things that I think about, and it will hopefully be useful for you. Now, I did already make an editing video. It was actually the very first video that I made for this channel, was an editing video on woodland photography. Now, a lot of my process in editing has stayed the same, so I'll try to avoid too much repetition and I will link the video. Please excuse my hair in that video. It was during lockdown in the UK. I think it'd been about 6 months since I'd had my hair cut, so it's a bit wild. But anyway, there's also some extra new bits and some extra parts of the process which I didn't have in that video, and they're really important to create this kind of nice, soft, glowing look to the images. So I've also included those, and they'll probably be around the end of the video. Haven't filmed that yet, but that's where I think they'll be. Anyway, so the reason that I said I wanted to start the video out here is because I want to show you how I kind of think about the editing while I'm already out taking the photo. Now, when I've set up a composition, like this one, which we've got here. Now, I'm not saying this is an amazing composition. We haven't got perfect conditions either. I'd have liked some fog, but I think I can still demonstrate the points that I wanted to get across. Now here, what drew me to this image was the lovely green moss, so the colour of this moss and the texture of this tree. I also love the glowing kind of golden sunlight, the side light on the trees. I just like the kind of nice warm feeling of the light as well. Now, what I start doing is I just keep a few of these in the back of my mind while I'm taking the photo. So I think about the green of the moss, the texture, I think about the kind of orange glowing light. So I think about the colours, some of the feelings, some of the things that I want to get across in the image. And I kind of just put them on the back burner in my head. And then I'll come back to those while I'm editing. Of course, I'll tie this back in later, so you'll see a little bit more about what I'm talking about. So do bear with me, it will all make sense later on. I'll just kind of move on a little bit and I'll find another scene and I'll talk through some of the other things that I'm looking out for in the image to hopefully help get this point across about how the editing really does start while you're out and about. All right, thank you so much for watching and I really hope you enjoy this video. Okay, so I've just moved around a little bit from where I was before with all these birch trees, because I just wanted to try and reinforce this idea of thinking about your editing and thinking about the things that drew you to the image in the first place while you're taking them, and kind of, like I said, put them on the back burner in your head so that you have them ready for when you get to your editing. Now in this scene, I really loved all the trees obviously, but I really like this kind of nice stark orange colour on the tree and the contrast with the green. So sort of like reddy oranges and greens are almost like close to complementary colours on the colour wheel. I'll get into that a little bit more in the editing as well. And these are just things I look out for. Again, I loved the green and the texture of the moss, and I really liked these two trees here. This one where it's kind of split a bit, and I'm thinking maybe that's something I want to kind of make more of the main focus, or something I want to bring out in the editing a bit more, try and draw the eye here. Again, I'll get this image up when we're editing and I'll explain a bit more about what we mean. Now, there's no avoiding the fact that you can see there's no fog today. Now, fog really is the magic ingredient for helping create these nice, soft, glowing images, but a lot of the stuff that I'm going to talk about can be applied to any images, no matter the conditions. So I'll share a range of photos from ones taken today, but also from ones which I've taken in the past where I had these kind of perfect foggy conditions. And I'll show you how you can kind of create that nice, soft glow to the images too. But this idea of looking for things while you're out and about and thinking, what was it drew me to this scene? What do I want to bring out in the editing? Just have that in the back of your head. You don't have to think about it too much. I usually think of it like mental notes. So I just take a few notes, leave them in the back of my head, and then I'll come back to them when I'm editing. But always, yeah, remember, what was it that drew me to this photo? What was it I liked about it? Was it a certain feeling, colours? Was it some of the characters in the image that I wanted to bring out? And that stuff I always think about when I get back to the editing. All right, I'll stop mumbling on, and I think we can head home now. I'm going to grab a cup of coffee. We'll sit down and we'll go through some images together, and I'll talk you through this editing process. Hopefully it'll help you to create some images which you're more happy with and bring out some of the things which you loved in the image when you took it. Okay, so I'm back home now, and what I've done is I've loaded up some of the images from this morning onto the computer, and I've also got a couple from my last video when I was previously there and we had lots of amazing fog, because I think it'd be quite good to sort of look at the differences between those and how I might approach the edit differently, and just to show how much difference having the fog makes. But the images I took this morning, they were more kind of reference images or scouting images, and they're areas I know I'll come back to maybe when we do have fog. But I think it'd be useful to go through them and edit them anyway. And I'll talk you through some of the things which I was mentioning when I was out and about and how I kind of take those into the editing process, and how it's useful to take those mental notes of the things that I liked about the area or what drew me to take the image to start with, and how I enhance them in the editing. Okay, now let's hop over into Lightroom. So to talk you through what I do and my general workflow, I usually start by sort of just checking in case I want to crop it at all. Now I shot this one in a 16:9. The camera actually takes the entire image at full size, but then crops in. So I just liked how it looked at 16:9. That's the only reason really. And usually I just have a little play around and see if I can do anything. Like here, I'm just trying to get rid of some of the sky here because I think it's a bit distracting. So I think that looks quite nice. So then I move on to the basic adjustments. Now in here, I don't tend to mess around with them too much. I might take the warmth up just a little bit, just to try and reinforce that kind of nice warm glow from the light, which I said I liked. In terms of the exposure and the contrast, I don't really play around with these too much. I try to get this mostly right in camera. This one's not exactly right, and I think when I go back to the scene when there's fog, I'd definitely change it a bit, but it's just a reference image, and so exposure, I don't really play around with that too much. Contrast, I add that in with the tone curves, which I'll show you later. Highlights, shadows, whites and blacks, I don't tend to play around with these too much either. Really with my Woodland images, I try to go for less is more in terms of the global adjustments. Shadows, I tend to try and have a little play around with, see if it looks better. I might lift the shadows just a tiny bit, just to bring out a bit more detail here. But I do quite like the contrast between the light and the dark region, so I don't want to mess around with it too much. Whites and blacks, I tend to pretty much leave these alone on the kind of universal adjustments, the global adjustments. So I tend to just sort of leave it as it was in the camera and how I took it. Texture, I don't really touch that much, especially not on the global slider. So I might apply this locally using a radial filter or the brush tool. I'll get into those in a minute. Clarity. Now clarity, I nearly always take this down just a notch on my Woodland images. I go into this in a bit more detail in my previous editing video which I made, which I'll link above. So maybe have a pause of the video and check that out, because I go into a lot more detail in some of the theory behind why I make some editing decisions and some of the reasons why I reduce the clarity. But in a nutshell, it's just to reduce some of the digital harshness and some of the harshness we've got so many textures really and things going on in the image. Lowering the clarity a bit just takes off a bit of that digital edge. Same with the dehaze, I normally just drop this down a little bit. Again, it just adds a little bit of softness, adds a slightly foggy, hazy feel to it, as the name suggests. So just bring that down really subtly. Again, everything's just really slight, really subtle. I don't really like to over-edit nowadays. I've definitely over-edited in the past, and now I kind of prefer a more subtle, less is more approach to my photos. Saturation and vibrance. I do tend to drop the saturation just a tad, and then I like to bring up the vibrance a bit. I just seem to do that more often than not. I tend to just favour how it looks. This might be more personal preference. So have a play around with it. You might like bringing the saturation up more, but I do like to, just bring down the saturation a tad and then bring up the vibrance a bit. It's just something I've done over the years and I quite like how it looks. Okay, so tone curve. What I do here is I bring in a bit more contrast to the image, and I nearly always do a very similar tone curve on my images. What I tend to do is I nearly always start by just dropping down the shadows a little bit. And as you can see, that's already added in just a bit more punch to the shadow and the dark regions. Then I raise the mids a little bit, maybe just over the line. If I just take it off and then put it back on, you can see it's added just a little bit of contrast to the image overall. I usually do something about like that. have a play around with it and see what you like. But yeah, I nearly always add the contrast in here rather than on the global contrast adjuster up there. Tends to mess around with the saturation of the colours a bit less. In HSL and colour, again, I barely ever change these too much. The only one I usually play around is sometimes I might bring up the luminance a bit. So if we use this dropper tool, you can see this is kind of the yellow-green region. And these were two things, if you remember when I was out there, that I said I liked a lot, what drew me to take the image to start with. So I might have a play around with those, bring them up a little bit, just to add a little bit more of a kind of glow and a pop to these areas. See with the green as well. Maybe just a little bit. And then I might also just add a tiny bit of saturation to these. I did really like the green, so I might bring that up a bit more globally. Hue, I nearly always leave this alone. I quite like the colours, how they come out. You can play around with these, and there are sometimes some images where I would mess around with them and shift them over a bit. I could potentially make the yellow just a little bit more orange here. Maybe just a tad. There we go. And then I'll just turn that off and then back on, and you can see it's barely noticeable. I really don't play around with these too much. So after the HSL, I'll move down obviously to the colour grading. Now the colour grading is something I nearly always apply to my woodland images. I think that's based on the fact I quite like a kind of painterly look to my images, and I quite like adding kind of complementary colours and things like that. I go into a bit more detail on complementary colours and some of the theory behind why I do this in my previous editing video. So like I said, I linked that above, and feel free to check that out if you want a bit more background about why I'm doing certain things. But today I'm just going to sort of skim over it. So I'll start by adding in, I think I'll try adding a little bit of coolness to these shadows. I'll also check how it looks warmer. No. So I add in a little bit of coolness to the shadows because it was quite a cool morning, and I want to add in a bit of a complementary colour relationship. So I'm adding a bit of blue into the shadow regions to complement the kind of orange glow from the highlights over here. So I haven't gone too mad. The saturation's at 12, and just added in a little bit of a blue tint. Then the highlights, like I said when I was out there, and always bringing it back to what I liked about the image originally, was these kind of nice orange glowing highlights. So I'm just going to try and enhance those a bit by adding a bit more orange and a bit more warmth into those highlight regions just to enhance that. So I just move this around until it looks kind of feels about right. So maybe something like that. The midtones, the way I like to approach those is I just slide in and add in a bit of saturation, and then I usually just move around the wheel because it affects quite a lot of the image, the midtones. And I just like to see if I like what it's doing and if it actually adds anything to the image, if it enhances what I liked about the scene on the day. And to be honest, I really don't think it's going to add anything for this image. So I've taken it off, and I nearly always don't apply midtones in my woodland images. Okay, so I'm quite happy with how that colour grading looks. What I like to do next is if I'm going to add any local adjustments. So what I mean by that is more targeting certain parts of the image, and I do that with the masking. The masking since my first editing video has changed quite a lot, and there's been quite a lot of new features like select subject, but I tend to just kind of use the same approach as I did before, and that is I'll select an area of the image that I want to enhance. So that was these kind of highlight regions. You can see I've selected them there. For the sake of time, I'm just going to do it quickly today. I refine the mask a bit. There we go. I'm just selecting kind of these yellow highlight regions. I'll take the mask off. By the mask off, I mean the preview off, showing where the mask is. Then I can just kind of increase the warmth a bit here. Just bring a bit more warmth into those sections, maybe not quite that much. And then I might have a play around with just bringing the highlights up a little bit, see how that looks. Maybe just a tad. Yeah, so I'm just enhancing those areas which I said I liked at the time when I took the image. So now the new thing which I wanted to show you, which I didn't cover in my previous editing video, and it's something I apply quite often to my woodland images, and it's something that you can only really do over in Photoshop. There are some workarounds for doing it in Lightroom, and I would love to try and keep my workflow mostly in Lightroom just because it's a lot easier. But what I do next is usually to finish off the image, I'll take it over to Photoshop. So to do that, I just select Edit in Adobe Photoshop. Okay, now that the image is transferred over to Photoshop, I'll show you the final thing that I normally do on a lot of my woodland images, and that's to apply the Orton effect. Now you may have heard of this before, and there's lots of different ways to approach it, but this is just the one I like and the one that works for me. So feel free to go out and explore and learn a bit more about it and see which way you like to do. but I thought I'd just cover how I do it, and hopefully it's useful for you. Essentially what it is in a nutshell is it's just adding a bit of a softness, a bit of a glow to the image to take off some of that digital edge and just give it a kind of nice soft feel, which usually works really well in Woodland images. So I've actually saved it as an action on my Photoshop. If you're not sure what actions are, essentially it's just recording repetitive settings that you'd add, and it saves them as kind of a one-click button. So you click play over here and it'll apply all of the effects all at once, so you don't have to keep going through the menus over and over again. And what I'll do is I'll see if I can find a way to put this up online, and you can feel free to download this and save it, and you can use it yourself if you like how it is. You can always play around with the settings as well to make it look how you want. So what the Orton effect does, I'll go through the different things that I've applied in my action here. First, what we do is we duplicate the photo. So I've just pressed Command and J on the Mac, and then go over to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur. Okay. So now Gaussian blur is loaded up. What we do is we change the pixel. So this is essentially changing the level of blurring. I've heard different theories on this. One of them is adding the same amount of megapixels as your camera. I don't really know if that's backed up by any evidence, but it kind of works as a kind of general rule. You can play around with it a bit, but yeah, I had mine as around 30. Let's go for that. Now don't worry, this isn't what the image is going to look like in the end. Okay, that's great. So we've applied that. Okay, so the second part of the Orton effect, which we're going to add, is if I just open up on the action here, is the brightness and the contrast to the image. And what this will do is help add a nice kind of glow that I mentioned to the image. And at the time when I was there was a lovely soft kind of morning light glow coming in through the background. So it's something I want to enhance in the image. So if I just click on my layer, and then what we do is we go to Image, Adjustments, Brightness and Contrast. So what I found worked quite well was brightness of 55, and then a contrast of 75. Don't worry, this is not what the final image will look like. I've not gone mad. Okay, and then we press OK. And now what we can do is we just change the opacity. So as you can see, we take this off a bit more, and it's just adding a nice bit of softness all around the image. It has a nice kind of soft painterly glow to it. Now, there's a few different ways you can approach this now, because you might not want to apply this to all of the image. So one way to do this is using a mask. So I've just applied the mask here by selecting the button down there, and then you can use your brush. You can use your brush tool. So we just select an airbrush from up here. Soft round brush would work nice. That's great. Just increase the size of the brush. And I've got it selected as black here to remove. So we could remove it from some of these sections here. I'm just doing this really roughly for now. And then I'm just sort of applying it to some of the darker sections, and I'm leaving it just on the highlight sections. So that's just to add that kind of softness and the glow just to the highlight areas. And then it takes off some of the softness from the dark areas, and we still keep some of the texture on the trees. Like I said, I'm doing it really roughly here. When you actually do it, you'd want to be a lot more targeted with it. If I turn this off and then back on, it's quite subtle, but you can see it's just added a nice glow to the background over here and to the side light. Okay, so that's one way that you can apply the Orton effect, or that soft glow, to your Woodland image. But the way I like to do it, if we just delete this mask, is using a plugin called the TK panel. So this is created by a landscape photographer called Tony Kuiper, or Caper. I'm very sorry, I'm probably making a complete mess of pronouncing your name, Tony, so sorry if you're watching this. But it's a really powerful luminance masking tool. It's very popular with landscape photographers. And this TK Basic V6 version is completely free. You can pay for a much more advanced version, but for my needs and what I use, the basic version is more than good enough. And what this tool lets you do is, or how I apply it to my Woodland images, is it lets you mask by selecting the luminance. So you might have seen now in Lightroom, they have some more crude luminance mask features, but they still don't really compete with Photoshop and not with what you can do with this panel. And what it has is it has a range of lights and darks. So what this does is essentially it helps you mask out a certain range of the light or dark regions of the photo. So I'll just select a couple to show you how it works. So if we click 1, and then I'll just go down them so you can see how it changes. And as you go further down, it kind of hones in more and more specifically on the lighter regions of the image. And if you did it to the darks, it does the opposite. But because we want to add a glow and we want to add it to the light regions, we're going to focus on this side of the masking panel. And this is what I always use as well. I usually add it to kind of 1 or 2. And this kind of just helps target those nice light regions, which are the ones I want to add the softness to. So let's try with one, and then you just hit mask. It kind of primes it ready, then you press apply. And what you can see here is it's added a much more detailed mask than we would have done with our brushing. I'll just turn it off and I'll turn it back on. And then you can play around with the opacity. You really don't want to go too far with this again. It's all about subtle. I mean, I'll show you what happens if you push it too far. It has a similar effect to the clarity in Lightroom where it just looks kind of a bit mushy and fake. So you just want to add a little bit of softness. There we go, something like that. Usually around 15 to 20 is what I add. I'll take it off, take it back on, and you can just see it's adding that nice little bit of softness and a bit of glow to the highlight regions. And then all you do is you close your image, you hit save, and then it will save those settings and bring it back into Lightroom for you. Okay, one final image that we're going to look at. Now, I really love this image. This was from my previous video when I was out and we had this fog. We had this amazing moment of sunlight just cutting through the fog, and it's in the same kind of area as I was in before. And straight out the box, the image is looking pretty nice. I'm quite happy with it as it is. I'd maybe just crop in a little bit just to make it a little bit tighter composition here. Okay, and I'll just really quickly go through all of these. I won't bore you. So again, I'll bring down the clarity a bit, bring down the dehaze, take the saturation, bring up the vibrance a tad, okay? And then I'm going to add in my contrast here. So just bring those shadow regions down, a little bit more on this one, and then there we go, add a little bit of lift there to the mids. I'll turn that off and then back on. You can see it's just added a nice bit of contrast. Okay, and then color grading, this is really important here. So the fog had a bit of a kind of blue tint to it in the morning. We also had the nice orange glow from over here. So I might just add in a bit more of that coolness to add the contrast. So I'll add that again to the shadows and then to the highlights. I'm gonna bring in the warmth quite a lot because I really love the warm glow from the sun. Midtones, let's have a look. Does it add to the image? Doesn't it? Let's just take that off. In this case, I quite like the midtones. I've added a little bit of warmth because it's kind of helping to enhance that nice warm glow that we had. So turn that off, back on. That's looking lovely. Okay, so now again, I'll make my local adjustments. So I really like the green of the moss down here. I'll try and select a color range. So I've just held and dragged the dropper tool. That's a little bit too much, so I'll try just like that. Maybe over here. I usually just play around. That looks pretty good. I'll refine it a little bit. Again, if I was doing this properly, I'd go back and I'd remove some of the stuff over here. But again, just for this video. So then I'll maybe just enhance the green by changing the tint a little bit. You could also change it with the saturation or something like that, or you can actually adjust the color manually. I'll just see how it looks with a bit more warmth. But yeah, I'm just trying to affect those regions that I really liked. I'll maybe bring the shadows up a tiny bit. Something like that. Great, and I think that image is ready to take over to Photoshop now. So we'll do the same thing again. Edit in Photoshop. Okay, so we already covered how to do the Orton effect. And what I did here is, as I told you, I've got a kind of landscapes action saved up here. I've got Orton effect here. Then I just press play. Great, it's added the Orton effect. I'll just turn it off and then back on. It's just added that nice soft glow to it. And then, as I said, I like to use this TK panel. I'll click 1 on the lights. That's showing me the selection. Let's check with 2. I think I want to add a bit more softness overall to the image. I press mask, I press apply. It does its thing. There we go. Turn it on, turn it off. It's just helped soften out that fog even more and create a bit more of a magical glow. I think I'll turn the opacity up a little bit more, something like that, 28. It's a little bit more than I normally go, but I think it just adds that lovely glow. Maybe that's a little bit too much. Let's bring it down. Maybe around 21. Turn it off, turn it on. Perfect, I'm really happy with that. And I hope that's helped show you how that final bit in Photoshop using that Orton effect is quite subtle, but it just adds a really nice softness to the image and helps enhance that painterly look if that's something you like. And it's really great just to have it as an action over here. It really speeds up the workflow because I think anything that decreases the friction in your workflow for editing is a good thing, because it helps you just spend less time with the editing and you can spend more time going out and actually taking the photos. Okay, so I hope that's helped show you an overview of some of the features I use in Lightroom when I'm editing my woodland images. And I really wanted to get across that point of always going back to what was it that drew me to the scene in the first place, what were the colours and the feelings that I had when I was there. And those are the things that you want to get across in your final image. And I think it's a really good way to approach the editing, to always go back to what was it at the time and what were the things that I liked, what were the elements in that scene that I want to enhance in the editing. The other thing I really want to show you today, which was something I hadn't included in my old editing video, and I think it makes a really nice but subtle difference, is that Orton effect, the glow. It works perfectly for woodland images, just helps to add a kind of nice bit of softness and a bit of kind of a magical look to the images. I'll try and find a way to add the Photoshop action for you below, and also link the TK panel, which you can download for free. If you like it and it's something you want to look into more, I think there's a paid version which has a lot more features. But the basic one works really well just for quickly applying luminance masks. I really hope you found this video helpful. I hope it's helped give you some new ways to maybe approach your editing. And I really hope that kind of nice magical glow, if it wasn't something you knew how to do before, you hadn't heard of before, it's given you a quick way to apply that into your workflow. And it helps just kind of give you that nice soft look to your images that you might be looking for. As always, I wanted to say a massive thank you for watching this video. If you have found it useful, I'd love if you could hit the like button. If you haven't already, please subscribe and then hit the notification bell. I'm going to have some more videos coming soon. So thank you again, and I'll join you next time.